Music is the most useless thing human beings do. Not in the sense that it provides no pleasure or meaning. It clearly provides both in abundance. But from the perspective of natural selection, from the perspective of a process that ruthlessly eliminates traits that do not contribute to survival and reproduction, music seems like an extraordinarily expensive and elaborate way to spend time and metabolic resources on something that does not obviously help you survive or reproduce. Consider what music requires. A specialized vocal apparatus modified beyond its basic communicative function. Fine motor control of the hands and fingers that goes far beyond what tool use or food processing requires. The ability to keep precise rhythmic time, coordinating body movements to an external beat in a way that requires continuous neural computation. The capacity to organize sounds into hierarchical structures of melody and harmony that have no obvious perceptual correlate in the natural environment. And the willingness to devote enormous amounts of time to the practice and performance of something that, on the surface, produces nothing. Every other human culture on Earth has music. No animal culture has anything that closely resembles it. The nearest analogues in other species, birdsong and whale song, differ from human music in fundamental ways that make them poor candidates for the evolutionary ancestors of human musical behavior. And yet music exists in every human society that has ever been studied, suggesting that it is not a cultural accident, but a feature of human nature that was present in the ancestral population and has been maintained across the extraordinary cultural diversity of the human species. So why? What is music actually for? The honest answer is that we do not fully know. The evolutionary origins of music remain one of the most contested questions in the science of human nature. But the debate has produced a remarkable set of candidate explanations, each of which illuminates something important about what music is and what it does to human beings, and the most interesting finding may be that music is not for one thing at all. Let's begin with the oldest and most influential account, that music evolved as a courtship signal. Charles Darwin, who was troubled by music throughout his life because he could not fit it easily into his theory of natural selection, proposed in his 1871 book, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, that music might be a product of sexual selection rather than natural selection. Darwin observed that in many animal species, males produce elaborate vocalizations that appear to function primarily in attracting females and competing with rival males. He proposed that the ancestors of modern humans may have used musical vocalizations in a similar way, and that the capacity for music was selected for because it made its possessors more attractive to potential mates. This account has been taken up and significantly developed by the evolutionary psychologist Geoffrey Miller at the University of New Mexico, whose 2000 book, The Mating Mind, proposed that many distinctively human cognitive capacities, including language, art, and music, evolved primarily under sexual selection as fitness indicators, signals that demonstrate the genetic quality and developmental stability of the individual who produces them. On Miller's account, musical ability is attractive precisely because it is difficult and costly to produce well. Only individuals with genuinely superior neural architecture, physical coordination, and sustained effort capacity can develop the kind of musical skill that impresses audiences, and potential mates use musical ability as a proxy for these underlying qualities. The evidence for the sexual selection account is suggestive but not conclusive. Cross-cultural surveys do find that musical ability is rated as attractive in potential mates, particularly in contexts involving improvisation and performance. And the age and sex distribution of musical productivity, with peak creative output in young adult males, is consistent with the pattern expected if music functions as a courtship signal. But the sexual selection account struggles to explain why music is so universally pleasurable, even in contexts far removed from courtship, and why it produces such powerful emotional responses in people who are clearly not evaluating each other as mates. The second major account of musical evolution focuses not on courtship, but on social bonding, and it has gained considerable traction in recent years. The neuroscientist and evolutionary musicologist W. Tecumseh Fitch at the University of Vienna, who has also contributed extensively to the science of vocal evolution that we examined in a previous video, has proposed that music evolved as a mechanism for synchronizing group behavior and reinforcing social cohesion. Fitch's musilanguage hypothesis proposes that music and language share a common evolutionary ancestor in a system of holistic, emotionally expressive vocal communication that preceded both modern language and modern music, and that served primarily social bonding functions. The argument draws on the observation that music, across all cultures, tends to be associated with specific social functions: religious ceremonies, group rituals, work songs, lullabies, mourning songs, celebration. In most human societies, for most of human history, music has not been a spectator activity, but a participatory one. People make music together rather than listening to music produced by specialists. And the shared rhythmic synchronization of group music making, the experience of moving together to the same beat, produces distinctive social and emotional effects that are difficult to explain by any account of music that treats it purely as a signal from one individual to others. The psychologist Sebastian Wallin at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, and subsequently the musicologist Ellen Dissanayake at the University of Washington, have proposed what Dissanayake calls the mother-infant interaction hypothesis of music. Dissanayake observed that the interactions between mothers and infants across all human cultures involve a distinctive form of vocalization that she calls artification, the transformation of ordinary behavior into something more elaborate, patterned, and aesthetically heightened. The vocal games, rhythmic bouncing, and song-like vocalizations that characterize infant-directed communication across cultures share structural features with adult music, including rhythmic regularity, melodic contour, and dynamic variation. Dissanayake proposes that this mother-infant musical communication is not simply a byproduct of language development, but is itself a biologically primary form of human communication that served the critical function of maintaining the attachment bond between mother and infant during the period of extended human childhood, when the infant's survival depends completely on maintaining the mother's care and attention. The neurobiological evidence for this account is striking. Music activates the same neural systems involved in social bonding and attachment, including the opioid system and the oxytocin system. Listening to music produces releases of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, the brain's reward center, and the degree of this dopaminergic response is correlated with the subjective intensity of the emotional experience. The emotional responses to music, including the chills or frisson that particularly moving music produces, involve the same neural mechanisms that mediate the emotional responses to social reward. The neuroscientist Stefan Koelsch at the University of Hamburg has systematically studied the neural systems involved in music processing and has found that music engages not just the auditory cortex, but a distributed network of brain regions, including the limbic system, the motor system, and the social cognition network. Koelsch argues that this distributed engagement reflects the fact that music is processed not simply as a pattern of sounds, but as a social signal, activating the systems involved in interpreting the emotional and social meaning of communication. The motor system's involvement in music processing is particularly significant. The neuroscientist Ani Patel at Tufts University has documented that human beings, alone among primates, show an ability to synchronize their movements to an external rhythmic beat, an ability he calls beat induction. Patel's opera hypothesis proposes that beat induction evolved in humans as a byproduct of the neural overlap between the auditory and motor systems that was required for the fine-tuned vocal learning that language acquisition demands. The capacity for beat synchronization has implications for music's social function that go beyond what any individual's response to music can reveal. When a group of people synchronize their movements to a shared beat, they are not simply coordinating their behavior. They are engaging in a form of neural synchronization, with the rhythmic entrainment of multiple nervous systems to the same temporal structure, creating a shared attentional state that is qualitatively different from the states of individuals listening in isolation. This shared attentional state may be the physiological substrate of the sense of unity and collective identity that music generates in group contexts. The anthropologist Joseph Jordania at the University of Melbourne has proposed one of the most evolutionarily specific accounts of music's function in his 2011 book, Who Asked the First Question? Jordania argues that the distinctive human capacity for choral singing, for the simultaneous production of harmonic vocalization by multiple individuals, evolved specifically as a predator deterrent in the specific ecological context of early hominin life. Jordania proposes that groups of early hominins who could produce loud, harmonically complex, and rhythmically synchronized vocalizations when threatened by predators were more effective at intimidating and deterring predators than groups who could not, and that this gave groups with the capacity for choral vocalization a significant survival advantage. The philosopher Daniel Levitin at McGill University, whose 2006 book, This Is Your Brain on Music, became one of the most widely read popular accounts of the neuroscience of music, has synthesized the existing evidence and proposed that music serves multiple social functions simultaneously, functioning as a bonding mechanism, a mood regulator, an emotional communicator, and a vehicle for the transmission of cultural knowledge and values. Levitin identifies what he argues are 6 social functions for which music appears to be specifically adapted across all human cultures: friendship and social bonding, joy and the celebration of occasions, comfort and the processing of loss, knowledge and information transfer, religion and spirituality, and love and sexuality. These 6 functions account for the vast majority of contexts in which music is used across cultures, and each function is associated with a distinct set of musical features and emotional responses. The developmental psychologist Sandra Trehub at the University of Toronto has contributed important evidence about the biological basis of musical perception through her research on infant responses to music. Trehub found that infants as young as 2 months of age respond differentially to musical features, such as consonance and dissonance, preferring consonant to dissonant intervals in ways that suggest a built-in sensitivity to musical structure that is present before any significant musical experience can have occurred. This early sensitivity supports the view that the human capacity for music has a biological basis that was shaped by natural selection rather than simply being a product of cultural learning. What the science of musical evolution ultimately reveals is that the question of what music is for cannot be answered with a single answer. Music appears to be one of those biological systems that has been shaped by multiple selection pressures operating simultaneously and sequentially over a very long evolutionary history, and that serves different functions at different levels of analysis. At the level of individual psychology, music is a powerful regulator of mood and emotion, a technology for managing the internal emotional landscape in ways that promote adaptive functioning. At the level of social interaction, music is a bonding mechanism, creating and reinforcing affiliative relationships through shared rhythmic experience and emotional resonance. At the level of group behavior, music is a coordinating mechanism, synchronizing the behavior of multiple individuals and creating the shared attentional states that enable collective action. At the level of cultural transmission, music is a mnemonic device and a vehicle for values, encoding important information in a form that is highly memorable and emotionally salient. Music is not useless. It is one of the most versatile and most powerful social technologies that the human lineage has ever produced. And the fact that it feels like pleasure rather than like work is the most elegant thing about it. Evolution found a way to make one of the most socially important things human beings do feel like the best thing they do. And that is why you cannot imagine a world without it. Even though, if you try to explain what it is for, the answer is never quite simple enough. The question of whether music is a biological adaptation or a byproduct of other adaptations has been one of the most productive debates in evolutionary musicology, and it is worth examining in some detail because it reveals something important about the relationship between music and the other distinctively human capacities that make our species unusual. The cognitive scientist and linguist Steven Pinker at Harvard University took a provocative position in his 1997 book, How the Mind Works, describing music as auditory cheesecake, a pleasure technology that hijacks the reward systems of the brain by stimulating the acoustic features that those systems were designed to respond to in contexts related to language, emotion, and the environment, without providing any direct adaptive benefit. On Pinker's account, music is not an adaptation, but an evolutionary parasite, exploiting the neural systems that evolved for other purposes in the same way that cheesecake exploits the nutritional reward systems that evolved for the detection and consumption of calorically dense foods in an environment of scarcity. Pinker's cheesecake account has been challenged vigorously by researchers who argue that the universality of music, its consistent association with specific social functions across all human cultures, and the specificity of the neural systems it engages cannot be easily explained by a byproduct account. The evolutionary biologist Tecumseh Fitch has argued that the cross-cultural universality of music, combined with its consistent emotional and social effects, is stronger evidence for an adaptive function than Pinker's account allows. If music were simply auditory cheesecake, exploiting neural systems designed for other purposes, we would not expect it to consistently serve the same social functions across unrelated cultures. The consistency suggests something more specific. The paleoanthropological evidence for the antiquity of music provides a temporal anchor for these evolutionary debates. The oldest musical instruments yet discovered are bone flutes from the Geisenklosterle and Vogelherd caves in Germany, dated to approximately 40,000 years ago, belonging to the period of the Upper Paleolithic that also saw the explosion of figurative art and other forms of symbolic culture. A contested flute from Divje Babe in Slovenia, made from a cave bear femur with holes that may have been pierced deliberately, has been dated to approximately 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, potentially placing musical instrument manufacture in the time of the Neanderthals. These dates establish that modern humans were certainly making musical instruments before the cultural explosion of the Upper Paleolithic, and that the capacity for music is at least as old as the capacity for figurative art. But they do not resolve the question of whether vocal music, which leaves no archaeological trace, preceded instrumental music by a much longer period. Most researchers who have addressed this question assume that vocal music almost certainly predated instrumental music, since the vocal apparatus required no technological innovation and the human capacity for vocal learning and voluntary vocal control evolved long before any instruments were made. The question of the relationship between music and language has been central to the evolutionary debates and has produced several influential theoretical frameworks. The musicologist Björn Merker at the Karolinska Institute proposes that music and language share a common evolutionary origin in a more primitive system of emotionally expressive vocal communication. The divergence hypothesis, proposed by the linguist Ray Jackendorf at Tufts University and the musicologist Fred Lerdahl at Columbia University, proposes that music and language evolved independently, with music evolving earlier as a social bonding mechanism and language evolving later for referential communication. The relationship between music and language in the developing brain provides some evidence relevant to these competing accounts. The developmental psychologist Laurel Trainer at McMaster University has documented that musical training in early childhood produces measurable changes in the neural systems involved in language processing, and that these changes include enhanced sensitivity to the prosodic features of speech that carry emotional and pragmatic meaning. This finding is consistent with the view that music and language share common neural substrates, and that musical experience strengthens these shared systems. The cross-cultural universality of certain musical features has provided some of the strongest evidence for a biological basis for music, and against the pure cultural learning account. The ethnomusicologist Bruno Nettel at the University of Illinois spent decades documenting the musical systems of diverse cultures and found that despite the enormous surface diversity of musical styles, certain features appear in virtually all of the world's musical systems. A preference for small pitch intervals over large leaps, the use of musical scales with a limited number of distinct pitches, the organization of music into rhythmic patterns with hierarchical structure, and the association of particular musical features with particular emotional states. The psychologist Samuel Mehr at Harvard University has led a systematic cross-cultural study of music's forms and functions, using recordings from over 60 societies, and has found consistent cross-cultural associations between specific musical features and specific social contexts. Songs associated with dancing have characteristic rhythmic features across cultures. Lullabies have characteristic melodic and rhythmic features that are recognizable across cultural boundaries. Healing songs have distinctive features. The consistency of these feature-function associations across culturally unrelated societies is one of the strongest available arguments for a biologically grounded human musical nature. The question of what music is for ultimately cannot be separated from the question of what music does to human beings. And what music does to human beings, at the neurobiological level, is remarkably consistent across individuals and across cultures. Music reliably produces changes in heart rate, respiration, skin conductance, and pupil dilation that are associated with emotional arousal. It reliably activates the brain's reward systems. It reliably synchronizes the emotional and physiological states of listeners, and it reliably produces the subjective sense of shared experience and social connection in group musical contexts. These effects are not the effects of entertainment. They are the effects of a biological system doing exactly what it was designed to do, whatever that turns out to have been. The most intellectually honest answer to the question of why humans developed music is that music does too many things, across too many different domains, too consistently and too reliably, to have a single evolutionary explanation. It is a social bonding mechanism. It is a mood regulation technology. It is a mother-infant communication system. It may be a courtship signal. It may have served as a predator deterrent. It is a vehicle for cultural transmission. It is a device for coordinating group behavior. And at the individual level, it is one of the most powerful sources of subjective pleasure available to a human being. That last fact may not be incidental. Evolution tends to make the things that are most important feel the best. And if music does as many things as the evidence suggests, then making it feel extraordinary would be the most efficient way to ensure that human beings keep doing it. Which is, apparently, exactly what happened. There is one more dimension of the science of music that deserves attention before we close, and it concerns what music reveals about the relationship between biology and culture and human nature more broadly. Music is simultaneously one of the most biologically grounded and one of the most culturally variable of all human behaviors. The biological grounding is evident in the cross-cultural universals, the consistent emotional responses to musical features, the consistent social functions, the consistent neurobiological effects, the consistent developmental trajectory. The cultural variability is equally evident in the extraordinary diversity of musical systems, scales, rhythms, instruments, and social contexts across human societies. This combination of biological groundedness and cultural variability is, as the anthropologist Donald Brown at the University of California, Santa Barbara has documented in his work on human universals, characteristic of the most distinctively human behaviors. The behaviors that are present in all human societies tend to be present in radically different forms in different societies, reflecting the interaction between a biological capacity and the cultural frameworks through which that capacity is expressed and developed. Music is perhaps the clearest example of this pattern. The biological capacity for music, including the neural systems for pitch and rhythm processing, for emotional response to musical features, for vocal learning, and for beat synchronization, is shared by all human beings. But what music sounds like, what it means, and what social contexts it is used in varies so enormously across human cultures that listeners from one culture can find the music of another culture initially incomprehensible, even while responding to it at some level with recognizable emotion. The mystery of music is not why it exists, but why it is simultaneously so universal and so diverse, so deeply rooted in biology, and so thoroughly shaped by culture, so ancient in its origins, and so perpetually renewed in its forms. And perhaps the deepest answer is simply that music is what happens when the most social species that has ever lived finds a way to feel, together, more than it can feel alone. That is what music is for. Everything else is detail. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you find this video interesting, please consider subscribing for more content like this.